But today, our mission for this deep dive is to show you exactly why those life hacks are failing you and why they will always fail you. We are going to chart a very intentional journey today, from that crushing ambient professional exhaustion toward genuine, sustainable, internal rest.
Love that.
And to do that, we are bringing in a stack of brilliant source material, specifically focusing on two foundational texts by Jamie V. Thornberry. So we've got excerpts from a book called Before the Verdict and its companion volume, The Architecture of Exile.
And both of these texts are incredibly compelling, really, because they deliberately avoid reading like dry clinical manuals or, business school textbooks. They're actually structured as intimate dialogues.
Which makes them so readable.
It does. In the first text, Before the Verdict, we're basically dropping in on a weary, high-achieving young professional who pouring his heart out to an older, deeply grounded theologian. And then in the second text, The Architecture of Exile, we follow a nomadic, highly successful remote worker named Ray, who is trying to figure out her life in conversation with an older guide who happens to be a master gardener. The narrative device of a dialogue allows us to see the friction, the resistance we all feel when someone actually challenges our coping mechanisms.
So the overarching mission of these texts, and really the core theme we are exploring today, is the attempt to close a very specific, incredibly frustrating distance in the human experience. It's the distance between what you might intellectually know to be true in your mind and what you actually experience in your physical body every single day.
Yes.
The text refers to this as the longest journey a human being must ever take, the 18 inches from the head to the heart.
That phrase is it's so profound. And setting the stage for that journey requires a massive paradigm shift right out of the gate. The text establishes immediately that the exhaustion you are feeling is not a failure of your efficiency. You are not tired because you are bad at managing your time. It's actually a spiritual symptom. This weariness comes from living at a slight, continuous remove from yourself. It is the byproduct of a subconscious that is constantly, quietly humming with the questions: am I acceptable? Do I measure up? Will my output today be enough to justify my existence?
Oh, yeah.
So the goal of our deep dive today is to help you maintain your incredibly high professional standard, because we aren't telling you to stop caring about your work, but to do so without tying your very identity and your right to exist to your career outcomes.
Let's dive right into how Thornberry describes this feeling, because he uses a phrase that just stopped me in my tracks. He calls it ambient exhaustion.
Ambient exhaustion.
Yeah. It's not the dramatic, cinematic collapse where you pass out at your desk. It's an invisible tax levied against every unguarded moment of your life, paid entirely in the currency of your own energy. It's the exhaustion of what the text calls the unmade life. So how does the book explain where this tax is actually coming from?
Well, the author uses this phenomenal metaphor to explain the mechanism behind it. It's the concept of living before the verdict.
Okay, unpack that.
Think about the psychology of a defendant in a high-stakes trial. High achievers, particularly those in leadership positions, often move through their entire lives every Tuesday afternoon, every weekend, as though their worth is still pending adjudication in some massive invisible courtroom.
Oh, man.
You walk into the office and every single meeting is a hearing. Every minor mistake, every typo in an email is a new piece of negative evidence being entered into the official record. Every piece of feedback from your boss, your board, or your clients is a motion that could tip the scales against you.
And the jury's always out. I can feel my heart rate rising just talking about it. You are on trial every single day. You send an email to a client, they don't reply for 3 hours, and suddenly your brain is the prosecuting attorney, cross-examining you about your tone and your competence.
Precisely. And living in a state of continuous trial requires an immense amount of caloric, emotional, and spiritual energy. You are constantly anticipating the prosecution's next argument.
So exhausting.
But the theological reframe that the guide in the text offers to the young professional is meant to completely shatter that reality. The guide explains that in the economy of grace, the courtroom doors are closed.
They're closed.
The trial is over. The gavel has already fallen. And this hinges on the ancient concept of the imago Dei, the truth that you are made in the image of God.
Right.
Because of that indelible mark, your worth was decided at the exact moment of your creation. You are already known, completely regarded, and loved unconditionally without having produced a single spreadsheet or led a single successful quarter.
Okay, I am going to stop you right there, because if I am a cynical listener or just a very tired listener driving to work right now, I am pushing back hard on this.
Fair enough. Push back.
I hear what you were saying. It sounds beautiful. But if the verdict is already in, if the judge has gone home, and I am supposedly unconditionally accepted, why is my body acting like I'm on trial?
That's the question.
Why am I sitting on the metaphorical witness stand sweating bullets every Monday morning? Why do I feel physically nauseous before my quarterly performance review if I am supposedly safe?
That tension you are highlighting is exactly the friction the young professional pushes back with in the book. And the guide's answer illuminates the vital difference between our psychological reality and our theological reality.
Okay.
The guide essentially says to him, you intellectually believe the theology. You can articulate it. You might even preach it to your friends. But you are holding that truth like an unopened letter from the court.
Oh, wow.
Technically, legally, you possess the contents. The pardon is in your hand. But functionally, you haven't opened the envelope. You haven't read it, and you certainly haven't inhabited it. Your nervous system simply doesn't know the trial is over.
So you are carrying around an absolute anachronism.
Yes. You are conducting your soul on a calendar that ceased to apply the moment you were created. The courtroom is closed, the lights are off, the judge has gone home to have dinner. But you are still showing up every single day in an empty, echoing room, aggressively prosecuting yourself, begging an empty bench for a favorable ruling.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. You are expending massive amounts of real, physical, and emotional energy in the service of resolving a problem that has already been resolved.
Which perfectly explains why we are so tired. We are fighting a phantom war.
Let's look at how this plays out granularly, because Chapter 1 of Before the Verdict dives straight into the fear of being disliked and how that masquerades in the corporate world.
Right.
For a leader, the deep, unacknowledged fear of being found inadequate rarely looks like cowering in a corner. It usually looks like intense professional vigilance. Let me paint the picture the text gives. You finish a pitch meeting. You thought it went well, but one senior partner didn't smile at your closing thought.
Oh, we've all been there. You then spend the next 72 hours mentally reconstructing the entire interaction. You scan rooms when you walk in to read the power dynamics. You bleed energy trying to preempt any possible rejection before it even happens.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize that this fear almost never announces itself to us as fear. We don't like to admit we are afraid. Instead, it presents itself to us as responsibility.
Interesting.
The high-achieving professional rationalizes it by thinking, if I just maintain a hyper-awareness of how everyone in this organization perceives me, I can maneuver effectively and prevent the worst possible outcome.
Because it feels like diligence.
Exactly. But we have to ask, what is that worst outcome? It's not just losing a client. The existential terror is being rejected, being found to be an imposter. That fear acts as a diagnostic tool. It tells you exactly where your identity is currently anchored. If a client's frown can ruin your week, your identity is anchored in social approval and professional competence rather than divine declaration. You are essentially asking finite human beings, your coworkers, your boss, your industry, to render a verdict on your ultimate worth, which is an authority they simply do not possess.
I see the danger there, but I have to play devil's advocate for the high achievers listening, because there is a very real practical tension here.
Let's hear it.
Doesn't this anxiety actually make you a sharper professional? Let's be honest. If I walk into a board meeting terrified of looking stupid, I am going to prepare for 15 hours instead of 3.
Right.
I am going to anticipate every single trapdoor question. I'm going to build contingency models. Doesn't that deeply uncomfortable anxiety force me to be undeniably competent? Hasn't this anxiety built the very careers we are trying to save?
It is a phenomenal question, and it's the exact trap that keeps high performers stuck. The guide in the text acknowledges this dynamic directly. He doesn't deny that heightened fear-based attention can produce excellent short-term outcomes. But he asks the young man a piercing question. At what point does the preparation stop? When does the vigilance finally switch off and allow you to rest?
And the devastating reality is that it never switches off.
Never. Because what you are calling a preparation system is actually an appeasement system.
An appeasement system.
Let's break down how that works. Its primary purpose isn't just to do good work. Its purpose is to maintain the illusion that you have control over an outcome other people's opinions of you that is fundamentally uncontrollable.
Oh, that stings.
The guide makes a sharp distinction here. The competence you show in that boardroom, the brilliant strategy you developed, that is yours. You own that. That is your inherent capability. The anxiety, however, is simply a heavy, exorbitant tax you are paying to access your own competence. You are paying this anxiety tax because you haven't yet learned how to access your own abilities through the avenue of grace and security.
It's exactly like paying mafia protection money to your own brain.
Yes.
You are paying this brutal psychological toll just to be allowed to operate your own business. And eventually, the mafia bankrupts the
And
business.
it always does.
This naturally transitions into another massive weight the text explores. Not just the anxiety of the future, but the crushing burden of past professional failures. The text makes a profound distinction between guilt and shame, and honestly, if the listener takes nothing else away from this deep dive, they need to hear this part.
It truly is a paradigm-shifting distinction. The theologian in the book explains that guilt, properly understood, is a temporary moral and psychological signal. It functions like a warning light on a dashboard. Guilt says, I did something wrong.
Right, it points to a specific action.
Exactly. Because it points to an action, it demands a specific response. Acknowledgement, repair, apology, and then crucially, release. The light is supposed to turn off.
Okay, so what is shame?
Shame, on the other hand, is an entirely different beast. Shame says, I am something wrong. It doesn't point to an action. It points directly to the self. It infects your ontology, your sense of being, and because it attaches to your identity rather than an event, it feels permanent and unfixable.
That is such a vital clarification. It is the absolute difference between saying, I completely botched that product launch because I didn't verify the data, versus saying, I am a fundamental fraud who cannot be trusted with leadership and I never should have been promoted.
Yes.
Guilt demands you fix the process. Shame demands you hide yourself. And the text points out a fascinating contradiction that really got me. We think that continuing to prosecute ourselves for past failures, long after we've apologized, long after we've fixed the issue, long after God has offered grace, we think beating ourselves up is a sign of humility.
Right. We think it proves we're taking our failure seriously.
Exactly. But the expert guide says it's actually a hidden, insidious form of arrogance.
I want to spend some time on this because it sounds counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
How can self-flagellation be arrogant? The guide breaks down the underlying logic. If you insist that your guilt is so profound, so uniquely terrible, that it must define you forever, even after you have been offered grace and forgiveness by God, you are implicitly making a very bold claim.
Which is what?
You are claiming that your assessment of yourself is more authoritative, more accurate, and more binding than the Creator's assessment of you.
Wow.
You are essentially looking at God and saying, I know you declared my debt paid, but my standard is actually higher than yours. My verdict on my worth carries more weight than your verdict. When you look at it that way, refusing to forgive yourself is not humility. It is a profound arrogance masquerading as moral seriousness.
It's taking the judge's gavel out of his hand and hitting yourself over the head with it, claiming you know the law better than he does.
That's a perfect way to put it.
To bring this out of the abstract, the text uses two brilliant biographical examples from the biblical narrative, David and Peter. And you don't need a theology degree to appreciate the intense psychological realities of these two men. I'll take David first.
Go for it.
If you want to talk about catastrophic moral and leadership failure, David is the case study. He abuses his power, commits adultery, and orchestrates a murder to cover it up. It is a total collapse of integrity. But the text focuses on what happens when he is finally confronted. He doesn't spend the next 10 years groveling, trying to slowly earn back his humanity or prove he is worthy of basic mercy. He accepts the horrific consequences of his actions, absolutely, but he casts himself on grace immediately. He doesn't allow the magnitude of his failure to completely obliterate his identity as someone who belongs to God.
And Peter provides an even more direct parallel for the professionals listening right now, because his failure happens precisely in his area of supposed expertise, his loyalty and his courage. Peter completely fails during the most critical, high-pressure moment of his life, denying he even knows Jesus. He completely botches his leadership mandate. But the text hones in on the specific nature of how Jesus restores him on the beach after the resurrection.
This part is so good.
Jesus doesn't just offer a blank administrative forgiveness. He doesn't just say, don't worry about it, you're cleared. He tells Peter, feed my sheep. What Jesus is doing there is restoring Peter's vocation.
He gives him his job back.
He is handing the job back to the guy who just broke the company. This is crucial for anyone listening who feels completely defined by a massive career failure, a bankruptcy, or a public misstep. Grace isn't just about clearing a ledger so you can go sit quietly in the corner. It is the restoration of vocation. It proves that your failure, no matter how severe, does not destroy what you are fundamentally built for. As the guide says in the text, you are still for something.
You are still for something. That phrase alone could save someone's career. And that leads us perfectly into the next major transition of the text, which is dealing with the physical reality of our bodies. Let's look at the theology of limits and what true sustainable rest actually looks like.
Yeah.
Because if there is one thing high achievers are notoriously bad at, it is acknowledging their physical limitations. If you are listening to this, there is a very high probability that you treat your need for sleep, your emotional bandwidth limits, or your physical exhaustion as character flaws that you simply need to overcome with more willpower. You think, if I were just a stronger leader, if I were more disciplined, I would need a weekend to recover from this week. We treat our human limits as software bugs rather than hardware design features.
The refusal to honor our limits is essentially a refusal to accept what the theologian calls our creatureliness.
Our creatureliness.
We are creatures. We are not mechanisms. We are not servers that can run at 99.9% uptime. And the theologian suggests a deeply uncomfortable truth about why we do this. He argues that our constant frantic busyness is not just a byproduct of having a demanding job. It is an active psychological strategy. It is an avoidance mechanism.
Avoidance of what?
Well, by ensuring you never truly stop, by filling every quiet moment with a podcast, a phone call, or an email, you ensure you never have to face the terrifying, echoing quiet where your actual, unfiltered identity resides. The busyness becomes far less about what it actually produces in the world and far more about what it prevents you from feeling internally.
I have seen this firsthand so many times. I know leaders, founders of companies who legitimately panic when they go on vacation. By day 3 of sitting on a beautiful beach in Mexico, they are crawling out of their skin, they are picking fights with their spouse, they are phantom checking their pockets for a phone they left in the room. They literally do not know who they are without the dopamine drip of their inbox and their crisis management identity.
It's an addiction.
It is. To counter this, the text redefines the biblical concept of rest, Shabbat. It clarifies that rest is not merely cessation. It's not just collapsing on your couch on Friday night, staring blankly at Netflix and scrolling through your phone until you fall asleep. The text defines true rest as the active presence of delight and attentiveness.
Yeah.
That distinction is paramount. Mindlessly scrolling on your phone is certainly the absence of your corporate work, but it completely lacks the presence of anything that actually restores the soul. It is just a different kind of numbing. True rest is the terrifying willingness to be a receiver rather than a producer.
It is sitting in a chair and recognizing that the world is continuing to spin without your active management of it. But of course, the young professional in the text brings up a very valid, pragmatic pushback. He tells the theologian, listen, this sounds lovely, but how can I possibly justify checking out and resting when I have genuine heavy obligations? I have a team of 40 people depending on my decisions. I have a payroll to meet on Friday. This isn't just about my ego needing to feel important. The work is actually heavy, and the consequences of me dropping the ball are severe.
It is the ultimate defense mechanism of the responsible leader. My anxiety is necessary because my job is important. So how does the guide dismantle that very logical defense?
He dismantles it by introducing the concept of durability. The guide explains that rest is not a reward you earn for a period of hard work, nor is it about seeking self-indulgent comfort. Rest is a fundamental matter of stewardship. A continuously depleted servant serves no one well.
That's a great point.
For a leader carrying heavy responsibilities, embracing your limits is not a dereliction of duty. It is an act of obedience that ensures your sustainable faithfulness over decades. It is the crucial difference between a brief 5-year burst of intense, heroic, self-sacrificial leadership that inevitably ends in a catastrophic physical or moral collapse versus the quiet, durable, regulated presence of a leader who can sustain and support their team over the long haul.
It is the age-old difference between sprinting until you vomit and conditioning yourself to run a marathon.
Exactly.
But to run that marathon, to actually engage in that kind of durable rest, you have to get control of the chaos inside your own head. Which brings us to what the text calls curing practical omniscience and developing the disciplined mind. The young man in the book, and honestly I relate to him so deeply here, vividly describes his own mind as a crowded room with no bouncer at the door.
No bouncer at all.
Any thought, any anxiety, any memory that shows up gets to come right in and set up camp. As a result, A minor awkward moment where he misspoke in the elevator on Tuesday occupies the exact same square footage in his brain as a multi-million-dollar supply chain crisis.
Yeah.
There is no triage. Everything is an emergency.
It is a phenomenal and terrifyingly accurate image of the burned-out mind. And the theologian points out that this mental noise isn't just random. It is actually a malfunctioning safety system. It is built on a massive theological and psychological error called practical omniscience.
Let's define that.
You would never out loud claim to be God. You would never claim to be all-knowing or all-powerful. But you function practically as if your continuous vibrating anxiety is the actual glue holding the fabric of your life, your family, and your team together.
Oh, absolutely. The secret belief of the high achiever is, if I am not actively stressing about this Q4 launch at 11 p.m. on a Friday night while I'm trying to watch a movie, the launch will inevitably fail. We have somehow confused worrying with working. We think that by feeling terrible about a problem, we are actively solving it.
Exactly. And the stark reality is that worry has never, in the history of the world, prevented a single negative thing from happening. What it does do with 100% effectiveness is prevent you from being present to the life you are currently living.
Wow.
To cure this practical omniscience, the text doesn't just offer platitudes, it offers very concrete muscular practices for the mind. The first practice is the discernment of thoughts. This means finally installing a bouncer at the door of your mind.
Okay, so how do we do that?
When an anxious thought arrives, you interrogate it. You ask, is this my actual responsibility to act on right now, or am I carrying this unnecessarily? If it's an action item for tomorrow, you write it down. If it's an uncontrollable fear about the economy, you practice actively setting it down.
Right.
The second practice is placing intentional limits on information intake. The human nervous system was simply not designed to process the sheer volume of global tragedy, industry news, and social feedback we subjected to daily. Actively limiting your doom scrolling or your after-hours email checking is not ignorance. It is a profound act of mercy to yourself.
And the third practice the text outlines is detachment. This is the conscious practice of entrusting the outcomes you cannot control to a higher authority. And I want to pause and interject here because we have been focusing heavily on the internal experience of the leader, but I want to ask, what does all this mean for the people you actually manage?
That's a huge question.
Think about the cultural ramifications. If you are a leader operating from a place of practical omniscience, constantly buzzing with anxiety and believing you are the only thing holding the sky up, you are almost certainly micromanaging your team.
Oh, without a doubt.
You are suffocating your direct reports because your internal anxiety simply will not allow them the oxygen to breathe, experiment, or make mistakes. But a leader who practices detachment, a leader who does their best work but genuinely trusts outcomes beyond their control, that leader breeds an organizational culture of deep trust, psychological safety, and autonomy. Your internal healing is not just a personal project. It is the mechanism that actually heals your organizational culture.
That is an absolutely crucial connection to make. If your style of leadership is fundamentally just an anxiety appeasement system, your entire team is paying the emotional tax for your unresolved fears. But let's shift gears, because the text acknowledges that when this internal burnout gets too high achievers often try a completely different external strategy to fix it. This is the perfect pivot to our second text, the architecture of exile.
Yes, the great geographic escape route. In this book, we meet a character named Ray. Ray is a highly successful, fully remote worker in the tech industry, and she has lived in 4 different major cities in the last 10 years. She went from New York to Austin, then out to Denver, and now she's in Nashville.
A true digital nomad.
Exactly. And if you ask her, every single move was completely rational. She optimized for her career, she optimized for the cost of living, she optimized for the hiking trails. But internally, she is dealing with a profound, aching nomad's fatigue. When the internal pressure cooker of performance builds up, the modern professional often tries to vent the steam by changing the scenery. We change jobs, we move to a new city, we redesign our home offices. We are constantly seeking the ultimate, frictionless, optimized life, believing the next zip code will finally bring peace.
And this is where the guide in the second book, Hannah the Master Gardener, provides such a piercing critique. Hannah points out to Ray that this relentless, optimized mobility essentially treats the human soul as if it were a portable tech startup.
That's such a modern way of thinking.
It is. You think you can just pick yourself up, drop yourself in a new market, scale your operations, and finally solve the internal void. But Hannah explains that the exile Ray is feeling this deep sense of not belonging anywhere isn't a geographic problem. Exile is an ontological condition.
Ontological.
Let's unpack that word, ontological, because it sounds like something from a graduate philosophy seminar. Ontology refers to the very nature of your being. Hannah is saying that Ray is living as if she is a completely self-created, self-locating entity. She is ignoring the fundamental reality that true belonging is not an achievement you unlock through optimization. It is an inheritance that you must humble yourself to receive.
Okay, the metaphor Hannah uses to explain this to Ray absolutely floored me. I've thought about it every day since I read it. It is the parable of the green tomato. They are standing in the garden, and Hannah points out some small, hard, green tomatoes on the vine. She says, if you pick these right now and eat them, they will taste terrible. They are bitter. If you leave them attached to the vine enduring the rain and the sun, they will eventually ripen into something beautiful. But Ray, and so many of us high achievers, do something else entirely. We pick the green tomato off the vine, and we carry it around in our pocket. We don't eat it because we know it's not ready. But we refuse to put it back on the vine because we want to maintain control. We want to keep our options open. And what happens to a tomato you carry in your pocket?
It rots. It slowly rots in the palm of your hand.
Exactly. It rots because you removed it from the very structure that was giving it life. Keeping your options open, waiting for the perfect city to put down roots, waiting for the perfect job to really invest your energy, waiting for the perfect moment to fully commit to a relationship or a local community is carrying a green tomato. Because you never fully commit to the soil you're in, the situation never ripens. You are choosing the illusion of potential over the reality of growth.
And this highlights the ultimate hidden cost of optionality. Modern high-achieving professionals absolutely worship the idol of optionality. We are taught that a flexible, agile plan always beats a fixed plan. Always keep your exits open. Always maintain leverage.
Yes, never get locked down.
But in the garden, Hannah walks Ray over to a massive tomato plant that is tied securely to a rough wooden stake. Hannah points out that this stake has been driven into the exact same spot in the ground for 6 years. The plant can only grow tall. It can only bear the heavy, pulling weight of mature fruit, precisely because it knows that stake is not going to move. It has something rigid and uncompromising to grow against.
The lesson here for anyone leading a company or a team is profound. If you are a leader who constantly keeps your exit options open, if you are always keeping one eye on the door for a better opportunity, or a faster growing startup, you have unknowingly placed an invisible, concrete ceiling on your team's growth.
Because they feel it.
Yes. The team will eventually collapse under the weight of its own success because the leader never truly committed to the ground they are standing on. People can intuitively sense when you have one foot out the door. To bear fruit, you have to drive a stake into the ground. You have to look at your team, your city, your life, and say, I am planting myself here. I am staying here, regardless of the friction.
If we pull back and connect this gardening metaphor to the theological framework of the first text, it brings us to a beautiful synthesis regarding how we define vocation, joy, and the inhabited life. These texts offer a truly revolutionary view of what vocation actually is.
Let's talk about that.
We usually think of vocation as a highly specific career path or a magical destination we must anxiously discover. The idea that if we just find our true passion, suddenly every day will feel perfect. But the texts argue that vocation is not what you do. Vocation is how you inhabit the specific, deeply imperfect life you currently have.
Yes. It fundamentally changes the question. You stop agonizing over what should I do with the rest of my life, and you start asking, how am I inhabiting the responsibilities I hold right now, today? And as we move toward the conclusion, the texts draw this magnificent ancient distinction between two types of happiness. They contrast the Greek philosophical concept of eudaimonia with the New Testament concept of chara. And this is where the theology gets intensely practical.
Let's dive into those definitions. Eudaimonia, which is often translated as circumstantial happiness or flourishing, is very much like trying to keep a campfire burning in the rain.
That sounds exhausting.
It requires your constant, exhausting vigilance. It requires constant fueling, perfect environmental conditions, and the exact moment the fuel stops, the moment your stock portfolio dips or your boss criticizes you, the fire dies. It is a deeply fragile state.
Okay, so what is chara?
Chara, which translates more accurately to deep joy, operates on a completely different physical law. Joy is a stable, unshakable interior condition. It does not demand perfect circumstances. It does not deny the reality of suffering, stress, or difficulty. Remember, the Apostle Paul wrote his most profound treatises on joy while chained inside a damp Roman prison cell.
Wow.
But joy refuses to let suffering or corporate stress have the final authoritative word over your identity. It is rooted in the quiet nearness of God, in a deep, abiding trust that you are held by something infinitely larger and more permanent than your quarterly performance metrics.
Which brings us to the ultimate transformative shift of this entire deep dive. If we trace the whole journey of these texts, the burnt-out, exhausted professional wakes up every single morning and starts their day by asking this frantic, anxiety-producing question in the background of their mind: am I acceptable? Will I be enough today?
And the tragic reality is, as long as that is your core operating question, you will remain exhausted. You will run on fumes forever because you are constantly trying to perform your way into a state of acceptance that can only ever be received as a free gift. The texts provide a final, radically grounding question for the listener to adopt. Instead of waking up and asking, am I acceptable? The grace-based alternative is to wake up and ask, what has been given to me in this day with this life in this exact moment, and what faithful thing can I do with it?
That is the whole ballgame right there. What has been given to me, and what faithful thing can I do with it? That shift in posture is the actual map for that 18-inch journey from the head to the heart. It is the realization that you do not have to build your belonging from scratch every morning. You do not have to earn your right to exist in the boardroom. It is a lifelong, daily practice of noticing the fear when it predictably rises in your chest, checking the actual authority of the internal judge who is condemning you, and remembering with absolute clarity that your case was closed, the verdict of love was rendered long before you ever walked into the office.
And we must emphasize to the listener that this internal formation is not a simple project to be completed, checked off a list, and shelved. You do not listen to this deep dive, nod along, and say, great, I have intellectually grasped grace. I am forever cured of burnout.
Right, I wish it were that easy. It's not. It is the rigorous daily practice of planting yourself exactly where you are. It's making the conscious choice every single morning to receive your identity as an inheritance rather than striving to achieve it as a trophy, and choosing to lead your team from that restored, quiet center. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have spent this entire time talking about how finding your identity outside of your professional performance saves you from the ravages of burnout. But think about the broader systemic implications for just a second.
This is fascinating.
The modern corporate ecosystem, as it is currently built, fundamentally relies on the unexamined anxiety of its top performers